This is Pat and Maurice Jones, and 2 years ago they were digging a huge hole to put in this fish pond. When they got a bit of a shock, they unearthed a human skull right here in their back garden in Raunds in Northamptonshire. And the local archaeology unit were called in, and they said that what they'd got was a Saxon burial, but they advised them to rebury it because the cost of full excavation would be so much. But Pat, you didn't want to rebury the skull on its own, did you?
No.
She's a true Time Team fan, and you said that you were determined to excavate the whole thing yourself. And as you can see, she made a really good job of it. And then you reburied the whole skeleton, right?
Yes.
But, Pat, you want to know more about the skeleton, don't you?
Yes, I do.
What do you call him?
Henry.
You want to know who Henry is, whether he was buried on his own or whether there are lots of other Saxons in your garden. In other words, have you got a Saxon cemetery?
Yes.
And Pat and Maurice have invited us in for just 3 days to find out. So, where's Henry now? When Pat had finished excavating all the bones, she put them into a bag and reburied them in this hole here. But they've gone, Mick.
Yeah, well, rather unusually for us, we've had the chance to dig them up and work on them before we came here. And it's a great opportunity to learn a lot more about the burial, be able to tell you a lot more about him when we've analysed the bones. But this isn't actually where he was found, is it?
It is. That's where his feet were.
Where was the head then?
Pointing over to an angle.
So the orientation was something like that?
Yes.
Right.
How long did it take you to dig him up?
It took a week.
And as a reward for all that hard work, you found these lovely finds, which we're going to have a look at later on. But in addition, and you are so lucky, I've been doing Time Team for 10 years now, and I've never found a Saxon bowl as lovely as this, but this is what you got. What is it?
It's an accessory vessel. It was put in the grave possibly as a container for food and drink to go to the next world with the deceased. It's very difficult to date this stuff, and I think this pot shows quite why, really. The decoration, these raised ridges, are quite typical of the late 5th to early 6th, but the shapes, more like the late 6th to the early 7th century, so it's a bit strange in that respect.
Mick, would you expect this body to be buried on its own?
No, I wouldn't. I'd expect it to be part of a big cemetery that'd be all over this area.
So how do we locate that?
We'd have to take a reasonably big area and take the topsoil off and see if we could see where the grave cuts were cut into the surface.
Did you hear that phrase, take a big area?
Yes, I did.
I think he wants your garden up.
Depends how much of your garden we can write off, really.
Are you happy to sacrifice 10 years of gardening?
I'm open to negotiation.
You're going to have to come up with some pretty convincing arguments.
Well, if we start with the grass and the path area here, that would be...
Yeah.
We could do a lot with that.
Mick's plan is to open up a big area across the middle of the garden.
Phil?
Hello?
You can keep going, look.
Oh, ah.
There's not a lot of room, but then working in tight spaces is part of the challenge of back garden archaeology.
I just want to get on and do something.
Geophys are using radar,
But they never find anything.
and they're under pressure to finish so that the trench can be marked out.
Where are you going next?
Up there.
No, not because we haven't finished yet. You just have to wait.
Will nobody rid me of this turbulent scientist, eh?
To add to the confusion, our surveyor is also called Henry.
I'm getting really confused with all this.
I should have called him something else, not Henry.
Archaeologically speaking, more's known about Raunds than most other towns because a major 10-year research project was carried out here in the 1970s. A 9th century Saxon church and graveyard was discovered to the north of our site, and some badly damaged 6th century cremation burials were found here. The Joneses' garden on the slope of a hill is in an area that's never been excavated, and Henry's burial, complete with grave goods, suggests that the Joneses might have located a pre-Christian Saxon cemetery, something that's never been found in Raunds before. Well, it won't be long before we find out whether there are any more Saxon bodies in Pat's garden, but understandably, she wants to find out more about Henry, the skeleton she's already dug up. And in order to have time to do the analysis, We sent an advance party here 3 weeks ago to dig up her bag of bones. The Joneses had to smash up the concrete around their pond to retrieve the bones. They'd buried them in a special archaeological sack given to them by Northampton Archaeology, so the bones were kept in very good condition. We took them away to be cleaned and examined by our experts. In the lab, Henry was pieced back together, and he's now been brought back to Raunds to be reunited with Pat and Morris. Bit different, Pat.
Yes, very.
The big question, Alice, is... are we right to call him Henry, or should we be calling him Henrietta?
That's a big question, isn't it? Yeah. Can you see that notch just there?
Yeah.
In a male pelvis, it's very narrow. In a female pelvis, which tends to be wider all over, we find a much more sort of C-shaped, wider notch. So that's a male.
So how tall was he?
He was about average for this period because height changes through time, and he was probably about the same height as Helen, I would think.
I'm 5'9", by the way.
A close inspection of Henry's spine had revealed he had a bad back and a pain in the neck.
We've got sort of pitting there, which means that all of the cartilage is worn away.
So is that arthritis?
That is classic osteoarthritis in his neck, yeah.
Henry's teeth were also causing him problems.
What we see is a lot of bone resorption, a lot of pitting of the palate, suggesting he actually had what we would call periodontal disease or gum disease.
How would that have made him feel?
Well, I don't think it would have been very nice, and obviously he couldn't have a course of antibiotics to get rid of it, so he would have had quite a sore mouth and probably increasingly loose teeth, which may have started to fall away, because this was clearly active at the time of his death.
Age?
He's got widespread degenerative change throughout the skeleton, so he had a few miles on his clock. He was probably, by our terms, well into middle age, I would think.
These stains on Henry's arm and hip are intriguing. They may have been caused by copper rivets on the sheath of his knife. But what about the copper staining on his skull?
The one on the skull is a lot trickier. It's, you start thinking of helmets, don't you? But I think what that is something that reminds us how much we lose just through the normal decay processes in a grave. We could have lost masses of textile, wooden objects, horn objects, things like that. And I think what that's most likely to be is from a little copper alloy repair patch from a wooden vessel. These are quite well known. They're flimsy little things, and they're to fix, say, a split in the rim. Vessels are usually up by the head. And so if that was turned so that the rivet was next to the skull, the whole thing could have decayed completely, and that's the only evidence we'd be left with.
This photo of a section across Henry's grave shows that it was cut into limestone and very clear to see. Would Geophys see this?
Well, it's not easy, because we've got all the overburden. All the garden material. Seeing through that is quite a challenge. We won't actually detect a body. We don't have a body detector, but we might detect that cut into the bedrock.
Reassess my...
Victor's working on a reconstruction drawing based on this photo, which shows the strange position Henry was lying in the grave.
That space between his knees is big enough for a wooden box, or you could even have a feather pillow or a pair of shoes or anything you could imagine, really. This is where you can see the real value of a reconstruction drawing, can't you? Because you can't hedge your bets. You've got to make a decision. Because I can see straight away that some of my ideas are actually wrong. Because the knife's vertical, as Pat and Morris found it, the sheath can't really be used to explain the staining on the hand or on the forearm. It could explain the staining on the pelvis, because the top of the sheath's in exactly the right place. But I think we've got to look for two more things to explain these two patches here. I mean, we could possibly extend the belt out to give a strap end.
About like that.
Yes. I mean, maybe he could have been really very fat indeed, and his tummy actually reached almost out to his arm.
So it just brings him to life. It makes him look like a real person now.
The way you haven't seen him before.
Yeah.
Back in the area Phil's investigating, the news isn't good.
This yellow that's in
this yellow clay with the limestone in it is the solid natural. As you can see, it extends right the way across this end of the trench.
Yeah.
This is the material that we'd expect to see the grave cuts in.
And we've got nothing like that at all, have we? No.
Lunchtime, and we've got a logistical problem to sort out. Why do we need to shift the spoil?
Because we've only dug one end of the trench already, and you can see the huge pile that's there.
Yeah.
We haven't even worked up towards where the burial is. If we come in after lunch and dig that part of the trench, we've got nowhere to put the spoil.
Well, you can put the spoil elsewhere.
John doesn't want the spoil moved before he's geophysed this end of the garden.
Do you not geophys there now?
Instead of your lunch.
Meanwhile, I want a quiet word with Pat and Morris.
It's really nice, this little gravelly rockery, isn't it?
It is, yes. It took a lot of time to do.
When did you put it in?
Last year.
Mick wants you to dig it up. He does, honestly. Would that be all right?
Well, I'd be a bit worried about the plants. I mean...
Suppose we put them in pots and put them over one side.
If that could be done, yes, then we would think about it, yes.
We're always neat and tidy. You've seen the programme. It always looks just as it was when we first came here,
Yeah.
more or less.
If you've ever wondered if archaeologists make good gardeners, now you know. As for me, I'm just unlucky.
Oh, I've broken the...
What about your wages? That will,
I feel as though we're on the wrong television programme, don't you?
There could, of course, be graves under here, but for the moment, dismantling this rockery simply gives us more room to manoeuvre. And the Joneses still have another rockery, so far completely intact.
That is some stiffish old tackle, isn't it, that clay?
We're now focusing on the other end of the big area we opened up and digging very close to where Henry was buried. The question is, if there are more graves in this garden, do we know how far apart they might be spaced? In the incident room, Helen and Carenza are looking at a plan of an Anglo-Saxon cemetery at Wakerley, 20 miles away.
Our single grave could, if we're lucky, be, say, like one of these ones here, absolutely surrounded by others, all on the same orientation. If we're unlucky, it could be like 21, and we would have metres to go to strip to find the next grave.
So although they're sort of all generally aligned in the same east-west direction, or sort of three clumps or clusters of graves, there's no boundary or anything like that. There's no obvious edge to it.
No, there usually aren't boundaries, actually, which makes one wonder how they relate to other aspects in the landscape. We really don't know. It's one of the big holes in our knowledge.
Did you manage to get your lunch, John?
Yes, thanks.
Geophys have now surveyed the garden, and their resistivity plot shows evidence of medieval ploughing.
It's arable farming, and that's just the ghost of it that we're seeing there.
But the radar survey shows signals that might be graves.
But we've got these two blips.
Which sort of corresponds to where the white patches are.
That's right.
So if Phil can get his string sorted out, we're going to open up a new area to test the geophys.
If you were any sort of a colleague, you'd help me out with this.
What, with some scissors?
It's late afternoon, and I should know better, but I honestly thought we'd have found another grave by now. I can't believe that we didn't find anything at either end of the big trench across the garden. More worrying still is that we've also opened up another trench here, at the back of the fish pond, and that's not looking too promising either.
Because of the alignment of the skeleton and the fact that nothing was found on the other side, we thought we'd have a look at this side. So we put in a 3x2 trench, and so far, unfortunately, we've come up with very little.
You found absolutely nothing?
And I found absolutely nothing. I still really enjoyed myself, yeah.
They're all masochists.
Oh, terrible, isn't it?
Meanwhile, inside their house, the Joneses are oblivious to all this because they're watching a video of the conservation work we had done on the Saxon knife and belt buckle that Pat discovered in Henry's grave.
Right, so these are the X-rays, which can tell us a lot more about what the actual objects look like. Here it's being cleaned up by the conservators, just picking off any loose bits of corrosion, anything that can come away without damaging the actual blade of the knife.
This is how the finds looked when Pat last saw them, and it's this encrusted blob of metal that contained the biggest surprise. When it was X-rayed, it revealed a lattice pattern that turned out to be part of the Saxon buckle.
Despite it being very, very mineralised, but it's been possible to expose quite a sharp edge, as the X-ray indicated was there, and at that point, offer the two together, like that, and there we have a perfect join. And what's very exciting, that the edges were completely corroded over, and there's no doubt at all that that is a genuine join. and revealing an extraordinary decoration. It's very rare that you get such a positive join in something.
It's absolutely fantastic.
You think it would look like that?
No, I mean, I never dreamt of anything like that.
Well, Pat and Morris, I'm very grateful that you've taken the trouble to collect all the pieces. In the case of this object, it looked the least interesting, but has so far turned out to be one of the most exciting parts. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to carry out some investigative conservation. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for doing it. That is absolutely amazing. I'm overwhelmed. I really am. Because I never expected anything like that.
Well, you remember what the objects looked like last time you saw them. We've now got them back from the conservator.
Oh, wow.
There's the buckle.
That is absolutely beautiful.
The X-ray of the knife allows us to narrow down the date for Henry's burial.
See that's the cutting edge where the iron is thinner, and it's got a curved back to the blade, and this short handle we may be missing a bit here. This curved back is characteristic of 7th century knives.
Fantastic. So we now know Henry was buried in the 7th century. We've also been working on a reconstruction of Henry's belt buckle.
Hiya. Fantastic. Pat, look at that.
Brilliant.
That's what it would have looked like.
Why did you do it like that, Helen?
Well, part of it's from the X-ray, part of it from the buckle itself, and part of it's an educated guess. We've added the loop in, which you can't really see on the X-ray from other examples. And also, we've added in a bit of decoration along the edges, which you can just about see on the X-ray, but again, that's an educated guess. And in fact, the examples that this is taken from are all 7th century openwork buckles, so it backs up what I believe is the date of the knife.
It's great, isn't it, the way that gradually we're beginning to bring Henry to life.
It's wonderful.
Mick, let's be honest, we really didn't do very well yesterday, did we?
Yeah, we did. We've got lots of trenches, look, they're all in red on this plan here.
And what's in them?
Nothing, just the geology.
Exactly. So how on earth are we going to find this Anglo-Saxon graveyard?
Well, I think we have to look in more areas. I mean, if you look at the red patches on here where we've dug, how much of that is of the percentage of the garden?
So far, it's only 5%.
You see, that's a very small area. I drew this up earlier, right? Well, this is our known burial plotted there, and there's 10 more burials in the garden.
Theoretically,
yeah. Which on the restrictions we've got, we would miss completely.
Even if we extended this and dug one there?
Well, we might find that one up there.
It's a game of battleships, isn't it?
It's exactly like battleships. You can be in the square next door, we can be an inch away from a grave, and we can still not see it.
So what else can we do?
Well, I think we have to increase the area we've got available. We can triple the size of that. We can dig an area here. But the other possibility is to go outside the area, isn't it? These boundaries are modern. They're nothing to do with the original cemetery.
So where should we go?
Well, we need to go somewhere where we've got space to do a big strip.
Yeah.
And the obvious place is the allotments up here. They're not being used at the moment. We could get a really big area open there, and that would really add to these small holes here.
Well, that would be good, except I don't want to see us avoiding Pat's garden. I mean, we're looking for more Henrys, and we're looking for more Henrys in her garden. We're going to dig here in the corner of the garden, even though it's going to involve a lot of extra work, because this area is basically a dumping ground and a store for various garden projects. But we're squeezing a second and much bigger digger into the garden today, so we're not going to be put off by extra work. If there are more Saxon graves in this garden, then Phil's determined he's going to find them for Pat and Morris. Having found nothing here yesterday, he plans to extend his trench big time.
So it'll run from here through to...
Yeah, we shall leave a bit through here for the digger.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can bring it right the way through, well, virtually as long as you like, really.
Oh, big trench.
Big area, yeah.
Across the road in a neighbour's garden, we've set up a Saxon camp. These reenactors are here to show Pat and Morris what they might have been wearing had they lived here 1,400 years ago.
Hello.
This is Ether, this is Billa. Hello.
How do you do?
Would it be okay if I fill the costume?
Yes, of course.
I was imagining it might have been a bit more coarser, but it's not. It's really...
No, they could make very, very fine cloth on the looms, yes, and linen for the dress. And I've got leather shoes, which are very comfortable. They take the shape of your foot. They're very comfortable to wear.
Yeah. And this is what you would have been wearing,
Men's
Morris.
clothing, very basic, very simple.
You can see here you've got the belt
Same sort of width of buckle here, and look, that's the plate that you've got that beautiful punch decoration that actually came from your burial, and the knife as well, of course.
Right. That's really lovely.
And you can see it's got the same angled or curved back, just the same as the one from your garden.
That's right.
That's what gives us that date in the 7th century, and gives us this handy point as well. Very useful.
Our search for a Saxon cemetery has attracted a lot of local interest and several people who believe they can help.
And they said that they picked up a skeleton in their garden, they found a shield boss, and I believe they found a spearhead.
If he's right, and another burial was found in the neighbourhood, then we've definitely got to check it out.
On the new, what they called the new estate then, so it would be probably the other side of the allotments.
Ah.
This man, a dowser, believes he can help locate the graves.
That here, see how this swings? Just there.
I'm willing to hear him out, but his prediction that there are graves under the natural doesn't impress the archaeologists.
And underneath the natural? Yeah, in bedrock.
I've been looking at the...
Stuart, on the other hand, has been studying the maps and has discovered that in 1798 the Joneses' garden was part of this parcel of land, which had a very interesting boundary description.
It describes the north boundary, being Marshall's Lane. It describes the east, the east boundary and the south boundary. And when it describes the west boundary, it says, and on the west, by the next herein described allotment, the hedges, ditches and mounds. And fences, which the last described allotments, blah, blah, blah. And he mentions mounds. And it's something potentially that might be important, Tony, because there are Saxon cemeteries where they're reburying Saxon dead in earlier prehistoric burial mounds.
Bronze Age burial mounds. Like that,
and if you look at the topography here, there's the garden, there's the road out the front, house, where our Henry was found somewhere there. Well, the contour for the high ground goes like that. This is the highest ground above the river valley here. So it's a perfect place for a Bronze Age barrow.
Because they're not always on the top, actually. They're often on what's called a false crest, so that viewed from below, they were on the skyline.
Say we have some mounds somewhere up here, then there are a number of cemeteries where you get clustered burials around the mounds themselves, and our Henry might just be on the fringe of that. And so the allotment is within the sort of ring around where those mounds might be, so we might have looked there.
Just to update you on our game of battleships, we've opened up 2 more trenches, one beside the fish pond and the other alongside the garage. The view from the conservatory isn't quite what it was.
Pan, come here. You're looking very worried.
No, I'm...
Yeah?
Please say you found something else.
Is that what you're worried about?
No, I'm hoping you have. I'm worried in case you haven't.
We thought you were worried about the state of your garden.
No, not so. Only a little bit.
Well, I'm worried that we're not going to find anything. But in the meantime, we do have more information about Henry.
David, you've been doing some work on the teeth, haven't you, to try and give us a second opinion about the age of Henry?
Yes. When teeth develop in the mouth, they're all sort of white, like this, when you look at them under the microscope. But from the age of about 25 onwards, the teeth start to become transparent along the root, from down here inside the bone, upwards towards the crown. And that transparency sort of spreads up the length of the tooth. So really all I do is to measure the extent of that transparency and then compare it with teeth that we looked at before of known age, and that tells me how old he was when he died. This is where I've taken a tooth out of Henry, this hole here, and the tooth that we've sectioned to look at under the microscope is this one here.
It is quite a definite line, actually, isn't it?
It's very clear, and that's why I'm sort of fairly confident about it.
Knowing the Joneses are particularly interested in this, Carenza wastes no time in giving them the news.
Now, this might quite surprise you, because we were thinking maybe he was in his sort of 30s or early 40s, but he was actually pushing 60.
Oh, you're joking!
You wouldn't, I wouldn't think they lived that long.
It's a very good age for that time.
35, maybe 40, but not 60,
I didn't realise that they lived to that age.
How did Henry manage to live so long? How did he avoid an early grave? Although no early Saxon medical books survive, there are 10th century herbariums that record herbal remedies in use for hundreds of years. Our surveyor, who shares the same name as Henry, has been press-ganged into trying out some ancient medicine.
Well, we believe, Henry, that your skeleton had osteoarthritis in his neck. So we've a remedy here. We've got nettle in oil.
Right. So what do I do with that?
You rub that onto your neck.
Nice.
I just think just the massage is going to make that feel better.
Yeah, and for your sore gums, we've got sage boiled in water.
Right, so
Big mouthful, gargle and spit out.
Right.
So this is a sort of Saxon mouthwash then?
Yes.
What's it taste like?
It's actually all right. It's sort of like herbal tea.
And something else you can use that for as well. You can use that if you've got an itchy bum.
How do you know about that?
Dr. Alice Roberts is intrigued, but not enough to actually try any of
We're
it.
still using aspirin, which is bark, isn't it?
Yes, of course. Yes. Take yarrow, for instance. That's good for just about everything that ails you.
Really? So it's a bit like paracetamol?
Absolutely.
Exactly,
yes.
Take it to cure any aches and pains.
For a wound made with iron, you can pound it with animal fat.
Right.
And spread that on.
So that will sort of keep the bugs out, maybe. Yeah.
And
I thought they used honey for wounds.
You can use a lot of herbs in the herb books are mixed with honey, which of course is an antiseptic.
Yes, it's
and
very
rubbing
good.
it onto the wound helps the healing herb to stick to the wound and do
Keeps
its work.
infection from getting
That's
in.
right. Yes.
So what's the news out of this one, Kai?
Nothing.
Nothing again?
Nothing. No, we've come straight down onto the natural.
So how are you feeling?
Depressed. Yeah, gutted.
The sad truth is that none of our trenches in the garden have picked up any trace of another grave, and Mick wants to turn our main effort towards the allotments, where GeoPhys have just about finished their survey. But we're not giving up in here. The plan is to leave our team of determined young diggers to carry on investigating the garden.
Well, I think basically we've only got two options now. We've got to put a slot through here to link our two trenches, and then do as Catherine suggested, which was extend trench 1.
This is this one here?
That one there.
Which way do you want to extend it?
Towards you.
This way.
Right.
Yeah.
Towards another flower bed, basically.
No, I think we can probably leave the flower bed. We won't bring it quite that far, but it will enable us to trace the soil that Henry was buried in, or the natural that Henry was cut into.
See where it's going.
See where that's going, because that's definitely different natural to the natural that we've had in these two trenches.
Sounds good to me, and personally I'd love it if they turned out to be right. Further down the garden, it looks like Phil's found a reason to keep digging. Phil, I thought you were supposed to be over at the allotments.
I am not leaving here, Tony, till I find out what is in that hole there. You can see this brown streak that goes around there. Look at the alignment. It's exactly the alignment that Henry was on.
So that could be a grave cut?
Not only that, we've got a piece of Roman pot out of it. That is not a geological hole, that is an archaeological hole.
It's the only glimmer of hope we've had, and the only way to find out if it is a grave is to expose more of it. Is there anything there, Phil?
You bet there is, Tony. Look, here's the edge coming down there. So you can see there's this yellow stuff. That's the bedrock, that's the natural. And here is the brown grave fill. Oh, look, more pot. That looks a bit Roman-y to me, too.
Why is it significant getting a piece of Roman pot when what we're looking for is a Saxon burial?
Because simply the Romans come immediately before the Saxons. It's very, very frequent to get Roman finds mixed in with Saxon material.
Phil seems convinced, but we don't know for sure yet. Maybe we haven't lost our game of battleships after all.
Perhaps they're more spread out.
Oh, look, it's dead on.
There you go.
Same thing, yeah.
Look at that. Does that look like a grave, by God, doesn't it ever, eh?
Again, if it's like yours, Pat, the head should be this end and the feet that end, shouldn't it?
The feet that end.
It's a hit. What a relief.
Can I get me trowel out?
Oh, you want to have a go?
Oh, yes.
Is this the way you did the first one?
Yeah.
Did you do it like as meticulously as this and just cleaned it all up and did it properly?
Yes.
And that was instinct that told you how to do it?
Just through watching Time too. Honestly, it's true.
Carenza, meanwhile, has gone in search of information.
We've heard that there was an Anglo-Saxon skeleton found in the garden of one of the houses along Spinney Street about 20 years ago. You wouldn't know which garden that was? Was it yours?
I wouldn't know.
I don't know, I've never dug the garden.
We was wondering whether or not you found anything in the way of skeletons in your garden.
No.
How big is this burial ground, do you
That's
think?
what we're trying to find out.
Eventually, Carenza did track down the garden where the grave goods had been discovered, and guess where it is? That's right, exactly where we're digging. It's tipping down with rain now, but since we found those grave cuts, everyone's so up. And even though we've turned Pat's garden into a hellhole, she's happy as Larry, because at last she's got a chance to dig with her hero Phil Harding.
Are you quite happy about having burials in your garden?
Yes. Yeah, it doesn't scare me.
No, it's funny how some people do mind, isn't it, really?
It seems like only moments ago we'd found nothing in this garden, and now... Kai, have we got another one?
Yeah, the theory was right.
David, show us where it is.
Well, it looks like that we're actually sort of just on the edge of the grave cut right here. It's quite difficult to see on this side because of all the muck.
Yeah.
But we do have, as you can see quite clearly, the bone coming through here. It seems to be going down.
So far, we haven't exposed enough of the bone to be sure it's human, but our young diggers are confident their strategy's paid off.
Pretty much the same. It's on the same sort of axis as Henry was and the one they've got over there. So, hey, I'm happy again.
So it's old archaeologists one, young archaeologists one?
Yes, exactly, yeah. It's a draw at the moment.
It's been a long wait, but now it's getting exciting, because in Phil's trench we can not only see the skull, but the outline of what looks like another complete pot. I suppose it's too early to sex it yet.
Well, from what I can see, it looks like a female. The frontal region's sort of fairly straight down and it's very smooth. So I think it's a woman.
And you can see the teeth, can't you?
Yeah, and you can see enough of the teeth to know that she's got her wisdom teeth, so she's over 21-ish. So it's looking good, actually.
What have you got up your end, Phil?
Well, underneath here, Tony, there's this lovely green thing there. But unfortunately, it's very, very decayed because of the nature of the soil around it. And then here, it's very, very difficult to see. We've actually got part of an iron object, so that might actually be a single object.
Paul, how's your vessel coming along?
Early days yet, Tony. I've just got the rim exposed. I still haven't got the full length of it. So it seems to be lying on its side.
Could the pot have fallen onto its side when the grave had been started to be filled in?
Possible, yeah. I mean...
And it knocked it over?
Yeah, it's entirely possible.
So it's the end of what's turned out to be a very rewarding day.
Well, I knew we were going to dig a big trench, but blimey. Right, yeah.
But it's tough going in the allotments. All we've discovered so far is that the soil is very different.
Very sticky.
Yeah, very sticky.
Yeah.
My boots.
Yeah.
It's very different to over there, and we're worrying that we might not be able to see grave cuts.
Okay, so what are you going to do? Go further down that way, or...?
No, go that way, I think.
Helen's plan for tomorrow is to open up an even bigger area in the hope that we can find out if the graves extend in this direction. We want to be able to tell Pat if the burials are just a small group or part of a big cemetery.
So that's sort of... Hang on, Paul, I think this is a big bead.
No prizes for guessing who's in charge of excavating this skeleton today.
Dealing with...
Is that a hole in the middle of it there where the bronze wire's going in?
Yes, it is. Look, it goes in there, and there's the wire going through there. And if I...
Oh, that's beautiful. This is great
this
stuff.
Business, isn't it, eh?
Phil's going to need all his experience, because this Saxon woman seems to have all sorts of mystery items buried with her.
There's a small iron object in there.
Yep, see that.
And then there's this big copper plate in there. And then I've got this big iron object in there, which I don't know whether that's a knife or what the hell that is.
Looks a bit like it.
Down by the feet of this skeleton, there's a further complication. Because it looks like there's more than one burial in this grave.
Last night we got this small long bone there.
That's the one I saw.
Leg.
Yeah.
Now we're getting, I think that must be the other leg, presumably.
Well, it might be a humerus, actually, judging from the shape of it. But obviously it's not a baby. If these bones are what we think they are, this isn't a baby. We're dealing with a small child, I think, sort of toddler.
Yesterday, our team of young diggers reckoned they'd found another Saxon burial in this garden, and now they're certain.
See the top of the skull just poking
Where's
through?
the skull?
Just there.
Oh, yes, yeah. Even I can see the darker soil of this grave, which is small and narrow. Alice, can you tell anything from what you found so far?
Well, we've only just uncovered the skull, so I can't really tell you much about it. It is quite thin, though, so there's a possibility it might be a child, but then if it turns out to be a 40-year-old male, I never said that.
I think you are. I'll see you later. So, including Henry's grave, we now have 3 burials in this garden, but we need to find more to establish it is a cemetery. And our best bet for doing that is in the allotments, where we're opening up a massive area in search of more burials.
As we go this way towards the gardens, the geology is changing, and it's more similar to where the burials have been found.
Well, it seems a lot sandier over there, doesn't it?
It is, so we're hoping that we might find one.
One would be good.
In the reenactors' Saxon camp, Pat's looking at replicas of everyday objects like wooden bowls and spoons.
Well, the spoon's made out of horn. This is cow horn, and it's very, very pliable. When you heat it up and put it into hot water, you can then shape it and do the various things with it.
All objects that rarely survive in a grave.
I mean, after all, we almost never find traces of these handles.
No.
And something like this boar tusk,
yes,
in a really acidic soil, all this would go, and you'd just be left with the metal bits, and then you'd have to try to work out what you'd been left with.
Yes.
Which is precisely what Phil and Paul are trying to do at the moment.
That loose tooth, just here. Then underneath the collarbone, and you can just see it sticking out. There's like a circle of wire. I think it's bronze wire.
Absolutely wonderful. To actually see her, though, I mean, it's something that is this old and you can actually see her.
Yeah, and you can see her kind of with the things that they wanted you to see her with. And that pot was put there for a reason, and now we're getting the benefit.
Helen, who do you think the people were who were being buried in this cemetery here? Are they Angles or Saxons or British?
I don't think they'd have thought of themselves as Saxons, because all the areas where we know that people were later on thinking of themselves as Saxons are well to the southwest, really. They might have thought of themselves as Angles, but that doesn't necessarily mean they were all descended from Angles, because although we think of great waves of Germanic invaders coming across in the Anglo-Saxon period, we've actually got about 4 million people, maybe as many as 4 million people, living in Roman Britain. And to swamp that culture with migrating Germans would be actually fairly impossible. You'd need millions of them. So it seems much more likely that the old Romano-British population just changed their culture because it was more fashionable to be a German. So they could be just the descendants of Romano-British people, but they wouldn't have thought of themselves by this point, I don't think, as British. They'd have thought of themselves as Anglian.
The second burial we've discovered is definitely that of a child. Although we can't tell if it's a boy or a girl without a DNA test, we can easily get an idea of the child's age by examining a tooth.
So you can see that the roots aren't properly developed because the points would be sealed. Right. They're quite open still. And this is the sort of thing you see in someone who's about 8.
Right.
So we're looking at a child around about 8, obviously plus or minus a year or so either way.
In Phil's trench, having carefully recorded the female skeleton and the grave goods all around it, the next job is to lift the fragile mystery copper object in a block of soil so that it can be carefully examined in the conservation lab. Next, pottery expert Paul Blinkhorn bravely lifts the second complete Saxon pot to be discovered in Pat's garden.
It's a cooking pot. If you look at the way it's all blackened around the top, yeah?
Oh, yeah.
That's soot. This has been used on a fire. Something's been heated in it. I mean, we can guess that it was used for cooking.
Yeah.
So there's a number of reasons why this may have gone in the grave. It could have just been to carry food and drink as a sort of, a meal to take through to the next world.
Into the afterlife sort of thing, yeah.
Or it could also have worked as a symbol of the woman's status in life.
Yeah. Like she ran the house, like?
Perhaps it was a symbol of her role in life, that she was the housewife, the cook.
But given that an Anglo-Saxon household might have consisted of several dozen people, we're really talking about somebody who's probably more like a housekeeper, actually.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you find female burials with these keys on the girdle hangers.
Yeah.
If you've got keys, that means you've got control of the locked places. So you have
and all the rest
exactly. So you have some control over the wealth of the household as well. It's not a subservient role at all.
In Phil's trench, it was thought that we might have a small child buried by the feet of the female, but it's now clear that these bones aren't human. Any idea what sort of animal?
Well, having got the species wrong yesterday, I think I'll just keep quiet on that one. The interesting thing with that bone is there's no sign of butchery on it, so it's not a joint of meat that's gone on in the grave with her. And you have to wonder if it isn't actually some sort of pet.
Next, Phil begins to lift the human skeleton, starting with the feet and working his way towards the skull.
Isn't it a question of once you've dug one, you've dug the lot?
No way. It's a total challenge every time you dig one.
All these bones will be cleaned and pieced back together in the lab, as was Henry's skull, which was reconstructed by David Whittaker using candle wax as glue, a task that took 6 hours to complete. Victor now wants the expert's opinion on Henry's appearance, so that he can sketch him for Pat and Morris.
The principal thing is, to my mind, it's a small skull. I really expected it to be sort of rather heavier and sort of more heavily built. His brow ridges here are not very well developed.
It's definitely not an Arnold Schwarzenegger type of appearance. It's a much more refined face.
He's definitely got a protrusive chin. Sticks out quite a way here. Yeah, very prominent there. The other thing is that the cheekbones are quite wide, relatively speaking, so that I think his face would have come in from there down to the chin. Yeah.
There's still plenty to do, although the absence of grave goods in our second grave means the recording and lifting of this 8-year-old Saxon child will be a much simpler proposition than the one Phil's taking on.
I wonder if we ought to have this little bead out.
Phil has the tricky job of untangling the upper half of the skeleton from a variety of delicate grave goods.
Is it glass, Phil?
I suspect it rather is, isn't it? Oh, look at it.
It's lovely, isn't it?
Beautiful blue colour. Ah! Oh! There's a piece of wire that comes across there.
Yeah.
And then there's another one there. And then we've got this piece here.
Yeah.
Phil's uncovering what looks like a series of fine silver rings.
Good Lord. Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? So you think all those little loops were actually linked together at one stage?
Well, they look... Now then.
Oh, something's moving there,
Now then, we can leave that more or less in position. We know that's actually moved. Yes, there's another one underneath. There it is, look at that.
So this chain is actually underneath her, isn't it? It's underneath.
I don't want to miss any of this.
It's behind her.
But I have to drag myself away because at last we've got some news from the allotments.
We brought Margaret because we've heard you got some bones.
Yeah, they're just over here.
We think the bones are human. We just need Margaret to confirm it.
This is just fusing. You can see that line along there? That's where this part and that part are fusing together, which means that the growth of that bone has ceased and the bone is now consolidating. So this is somebody in their mid-late teens.
The bad news is that the grave's been largely destroyed by medieval ploughing. You can see the trace of a furrow in this section of the trench. The only bit of the skeleton left intact are the legs.
There are the ends of the leg bones.
Oh, yeah.
And they're shooting off into the section, and the feet will be outside the trench.
But at least this knife and other bits of metalwork we found with the bones tell us the grave is Anglo-Saxon.
How far away is this from Henry?
Oh, I don't know, about 30 metres that way.
So, could this be a separate burial, or does it have to be part of the conglomeration of burials over there?
I think it's highly unlikely it's separate.
Even though we're in a different field now, then we would have been in the same place.
So if we've got 4, are you happy to say that this is now a cemetery?
Yeah, I think we can officially now call
Yes, we have a cemetery.
Just what we wanted to hear. With time running out, the focus now is on finding out as much as we can about the Saxon woman buried in Pat's garden.
So her teeth, when she closed them, when you close your back teeth, most people overlap from the top, but hers didn't. They were sort of edge to edge, like that.
Is this a glass bead or is it made of stone?
Pure circle round here.
Although it's hard to see, this is a bone disc decorated with ring and dot design. We're almost at the end of the dig, and understandably the neighbours are curious about what's been happening in Pat's garden.
This shows their garden, and it shows you the trenches we've dug. We haven't been able to do as much work perhaps as we'd like to have done.
Although we've now exposed the feet belonging to the burial we found in the allotments, we'd have to dig a lot more of the local area to know how many more graves make up this cemetery.
So you're all probably standing on top of Anglo-Saxon graves right now.
Stuart thinks the Anglo-Saxons were burying their dead close to Bronze Age burial mounds.
That's why the cemetery might be there.
And we can create an impression for the Joneses of what that might have looked like.
Our cemetery is right on the horizon, so if you imagine there are barrows...
Surveyor Henry has produced a 3D model showing that the burials in green would have been visible from any settlement within this red zone.
Well, Victor has done a reconstruction.
But perhaps more than anything, Pat wanted to know more about the skeleton she excavated, and we've done our best to bring Henry to life for her.
Of what we think he might have looked like. And Martin's here to try and give you some idea of what he might have sounded like.
Quite on that he were.
world Cunninga, Mana Mildust, on Monthwaust, Leodom Lithost, and Lofionost.
You probably want to know what that means.
Right, yes. It means they said he was the mildest of men, the most gentle, the kindest to his people, and the most eager for glory.
And he does look like that, doesn't he?
That is
Yes.
absolutely lovely. Thank you very much.
And we've wrecked your garden as well.
Nothing that can't be put back. And worth it to prove that Henry wasn't an isolated burial, but part of a pre-Christian Anglo-Saxon cemetery, the only one ever discovered in Raunds.
Brilliant. Well done, Phil.
So what would you like us to do with it?
Well, I think try and keep the bits of each ring separate.
Keep separate, okay.
They look different sizes and they might have different characteristics.
It's all new and exciting detail about life and death in the 7th century.
Oh, Phil, that's wonderful.
They're totally independent, aren't they?
But it's only after the dig, when the finds are cleaned and the bones examined, that we can picture this grave as it was when it was last seen in the 7th century. This Anglo-Saxon woman was in her early 20s when she died. She was wearing her necklace of silver rings and glass beads. She wore a bone brooch decorated with ring and dot design. Other objects had been placed around her. A knife, a river-worn pebble with a copper ring through it, a small copper-plated wooden box of which only the copper survives, and a cooking pot. But for me, the most unusual discovery was that there was an animal buried with her, and this we now know was a small dog.
There's a case of mosaics after the break on Discovery Channel as the team discovers something rather unusual under a Somerset pig farmer's styes.